Months passed, and the ripple effects of Judge Hart and Michael Grayson's partnership continued to spread throughout the city. What had begun as a single act of redemption in a courtroom blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. The legal aid initiative they created became a model for other cities, drawing attention from lawmakers, activists, and even national media outlets. Stories poured in from individuals who had been helped, families reunited with stable housing, elderly tenants protected from unfair evictions, and young adults given a second chance at building brighter futures. Through it all, Judge Hart and Michael stood side by side, their bond growing stronger with each success. For Judge Hart, the experience profoundly reshaped her perspective on justice. She no longer saw cases as black and white matters to be resolved quickly. Instead, she approached them with curiosity and care, seeking to understand the human stories behind the facts. Her courtroom transformed into a place where people felt heard rather than judged, a stark contrast to its earlier reputation for cold efficiency. Even her colleagues noticed the change. "You're different now," one fellow judge remarked during a lunch meeting. "Softer, maybe, but also wiser." Judge Hart smiled at the comment, knowing there was truth in it. "I've learned that fairness isn't just about following rules," she explained. "It's about seeing people for who they are, not what they appear to be. And sometimes, you need someone like Michael to remind you of that." As for Michael, his life took on new meaning. Though he remained humble, refusing to accept accolades or elevate himself above others, he became a symbol of hope for many. People admired not only his intellect and dedication, but also his unwavering belief in humanity. He often said, "I'm not special because I'm an attorney. I'm special because I chose to listen when others didn't." Those words resonated deeply with everyone who heard them, reminding them that true greatness lies in empathy and service. The partnership between Judge Hart and Michael also inspired broader changes within the community. Local businesses began offering job training programs tailored to homeless individuals, while schools incorporated lessons on social justice and advocacy into their curricula. Neighborhoods once divided by fear and misunderstanding started coming together, united by a shared vision of compassion and progress. It was as if their collaboration had unlocked something long dormant, a collective desire to build a better world. One evening, after a particularly successful day at the courthouse, Judge Hart invited Michael to join her for coffee at a small cafe nearby. Sitting across from him, she reflected on how far they'd come. "Do you ever think about where we started?" she asked, stirring her cup thoughtfully. "That day in court, I never imagined it would lead to this." Michael chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But maybe that's the beauty of it. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments bring out the best in us, and in others." They spent the next hour talking about the future, dreaming up new ideas to expand their efforts. From mobile legal clinics to mentorship programs for aspiring lawyers, the possibilities seemed endless. Yet beneath the excitement lay a deeper realization. They weren't just changing systems, they were changing hearts. By challenging stereotypes and fostering understanding, they were proving that kindness could overcome prejudice and that unity could triumph over division. When they finally parted ways that night, Judge Hart watched Michael walk down the street, his figure illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not just for him, but for the lesson he had taught her. Appearances rarely tell the full story, and beneath every surface lies potential waiting to be uncovered. In the end, their journey was more than just a tale of redemption or transformation. It was a testament to the power of humility, courage, and collaboration. It reminded everyone who witnessed it that no matter how far apart people may seem, bridges can always be built, and that the smallest acts of understanding can spark the greatest changes. As the city slept, Judge Hart returned home, her heart full of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she faced them knowing that together, anything was possible. In the weeks that followed, Judge Hart and Michael Grayson worked tirelessly to bring their shared vision to life. The courthouse buzzed with newfound energy as plans for the legal aid initiative took shape. Word spread quickly through the community, drawing support from unexpected corners. Local attorneys volunteered their time, nonprofit organizations pledged resources, and even businesses donated funds to help get the program off the ground. What had started as a simple idea in a courtroom was rapidly transforming into a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. Michael became the heart and soul of the project. His deep understanding of both the law and the struggles faced by marginalized communities made him an invaluable leader. He spent hours consulting with families facing eviction, guiding them through complex legal processes and ensuring they understood their rights. But he didn't stop there. Recognizing that housing issues often stemmed from larger systemic problems like unemployment or health crisis, Michael pushed for partnerships with social workers, job training programs, and mental health counselors. It wasn't enough to simply keep people in their homes. They needed tools to build stable, sustainable lives. Judge Hart, meanwhile, used her position to advocate for broader changes within the justice system. She began hosting workshops for other judges and court staff, urging them to approach cases involving homelessness and poverty with greater empathy. "We can't solve these problems overnight," she told attendees during one session, "but we can start by treating every individual with dignity and respect. That's where real change begins." The impact of their efforts soon became visible. Families on the brink of losing their homes found reprieve thanks to pro bono representation coordinated by the initiative. Shelters reported fewer overcrowded nights as newly implemented policies helped prevent evictions before they happened. Even local news outlets picked up the story, highlighting how a chance encounter in a courtroom had sparked a movement toward fairness and compassion. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred within Judge Hart herself. Once known for her stern demeanor and rigid adherence to rules, she now approached each case with a renewed sense of purpose. Where before she might have dismissed someone based on appearances or assumptions, she now took the time to listen, to truly hear their stories. Her colleagues noticed the shift, remarking on how much warmer and approachable she had become. Some joked that Michael had softened her, but deep down, they admired the change. For Michael, the journey was equally transformative. Though he continued to live modestly, choosing to remain connected to the community he served, his work brought him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. People no longer saw him as just another homeless man. They recognized him as a symbol of resilience and hope. Strangers approached him on the street to thank him, sharing how his advocacy had changed their lives. And while he never sought recognition, he couldn't deny the joy it brought him to see others thriving because of his efforts. Together, Judge Hart and Michael proved that collaboration could bridge divides and create lasting impact. Their partnership showed that even the smallest acts of kindness and understanding could ripple outward, touching countless lives. They weren't just addressing immediate needs, they were planting seeds for a better future, one where justice wasn't reserved for the privileged but extended to all. As the initiative gained momentum, its influence stretched beyond the courthouse walls. Schools invited Michael to speak about overcoming adversity, inspiring students to pursue careers in public service. Local lawmakers began drafting legislation aimed at protecting tenants' rights, citing the success of the program as evidence of what could be achieved when compassion guided policy. Slowly but surely, the city itself began to transform, not overnight, but step by step, person by person. It was proof that even in a world often divided by prejudice and misunderstanding, unity was possible. All it took was two people willing to look past surface-level differences and work together toward a common goal. And in doing so, they reminded everyone around them of something powerful. That true justice isn't about judgment, it's about lifting others up, no matter where they've been or how far they have to go. Judge Hart's voice carried a new tone as she addressed the courtroom, softer, yet filled with purpose. The tension that had once dominated the room began to ease, replaced by an almost palpable sense of reflection. "Mr. Grayson," she said, leaning forward slightly, her eyes meeting his, "your actions today have reminded me, and everyone here, That justice isn't just about punishment. It's also about understanding, compassion, and finding ways to lift people up rather than tear them down. Michael nodded, his expression calm but attentive. He didn't interrupt or try to steer the conversation. Instead, he listened intently, respecting the judge's moment of vulnerability. Sensing his sincerity, Judge Hart continued. You've spoken passionately about your work helping marginalized communities, particularly those facing eviction and homelessness. I admire your dedication, but it's clear that you're fighting this battle alone. You shouldn't have to carry such a heavy burden by yourself. Her words caught Michael off guard, though he hid it well. For years, he had grown accustomed to working in solitude, convinced that no one would truly understand or care about the struggles of the forgotten. Yet here was Judge Hart, not only acknowledging his efforts but offering genuine support. What if, she proposed, her tone thoughtful, we worked together to create something meaningful? Something that could address the root causes of cases like yours and prevent others from falling through the cracks. She glanced around the courtroom, addressing both Michael and the spectators. Our legal system often fails those who need it most. But maybe, with the right partnerships, we can begin to change that. The idea hung in the air, sparking curiosity among those present. Michael tilted his head slightly, considering her offer. Your Honor, he replied after a pause, I appreciate your willingness to collaborate. But systemic issues like homelessness and wrongful evictions require more than just goodwill. They demand resources, commitment, and long-term solutions. I'm aware of that. Judge Hart responded quickly, her determination evident, which is why I'd like to propose something concrete. Let's establish a program within this courthouse, a legal aid initiative specifically designed to assist individuals facing housing crisis. We'll provide free consultations, connect them with pro bono attorneys, and even partner with local shelters and advocacy groups to ensure they receive holistic support. The courtroom erupted into murmurs of approval. Even the prosecutor, who had initially been skeptical of Michael, found himself nodding along. It was a bold idea, one that required effort and coordination, but it also felt necessary. Too many lives were being derailed by circumstances beyond their control, and too few avenues existed for them to seek help. Michael smiled faintly, touched by the judge's vision. If you're serious about this, he said, then count me in. I'd be honored to contribute however I can. His response seemed to galvanize Judge Hart further. She sat up straighter, her earlier embarrassment replaced by excitement. Good, she declared, her voice firm and resolute. We'll start immediately. I'll reach out to community leaders, nonprofits, and other stakeholders to build a coalition. And Mr. Grayson, I'd like you to take a leading role in shaping this initiative. Your experience, not just as an attorney, but as someone who has lived alongside the very people we're trying to help, will be invaluable. The gallery erupted into applause, breaking the formality of the courtroom. Spectators exchanged smiles, some whispering words of encouragement to Michael. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope in the air, a shared belief that real change was possible. As the session drew to a close, Judge Hart dismissed the trespassing charges against Michael, citing his cooperation and the unique circumstances of the case. But more importantly, she extended an olive branch, an invitation to work together toward a brighter future. For Michael, it was a turning point. After years of feeling invisible, he was finally being seen, not as a homeless man, but as a champion for justice. And for Judge Hart, it was a chance to redeem herself, to transform her courtroom into a place where fairness and empathy went hand in hand. Together, they stood on the brink of something extraordinary, a partnership that promised to rewrite the narrative for countless lives in need. As the weight of Michael's revelation settled over the courtroom, Judge Hart took a deep breath, her usual stern composure replaced by an uncharacteristic vulnerability. She looked down at the attorney's license one more time, as if hoping it might somehow explain everything. But the truth was undeniable. The man standing before her wasn't just another defendant. He was a highly qualified legal professional who had willingly walked away from privilege to live among those he sought to help. Realizing that words alone wouldn't suffice, Michael reached into his wallet again and produced additional documents. He handed them to the bailiff, who passed them along to the judge. These included letters of recommendation from prominent judges, certificates of recognition for his pro bono work, and even newspaper clippings highlighting his efforts to reform housing laws. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man deeply committed to justice, not just in theory, but in practice. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly struggling to reconcile the image of the disheveled man before him with the accomplished attorney described in the documents. "Your Honor," he said hesitantly, "even if all this is true, and I still have questions, it doesn't change the fact that Mr. Grayson broke the law." Michael nodded calmly. "You're correct," he replied. "I did break the law, and I take full responsibility for my actions. However, I hope you'll consider the intent behind them. My goal wasn't to harm or disrupt. It was to gather critical information needed to defend families facing eviction. Sometimes, doing the right thing requires bending the rules, not because we disrespect them, but because we respect the greater purpose they serve." His explanation resonated with many in the courtroom, including some jurors sitting nearby who had been observing quietly. They exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism giving way to admiration. Here was a man who could have lived comfortably, yet he chose a harder path, one paved with sacrifice and selflessness. Judge Hart, still holding the documents, finally spoke. Her voice carried a mix of regret and determination. "Mr. Grayson," she began, addressing him formally now, "I must admit, I misjudged you. Based on your appearance and circumstances, I allowed myself to form assumptions that were unfair and unwarranted." She paused, her gaze steady but tinged with remorse. "For that, I apologize, not only to you, but to everyone here. As someone tasked with upholding justice, I failed to see beyond surface-level impressions, and that is unacceptable." Her apology rippled through the room like a wave, leaving spectators stunned. Never had they witnessed such a public acknowledgement of error from Judge Hart, whose reputation for rigidity was well known. Yet here she was, humbling herself in front of a man she had once mocked. A powerful reminder that even those in positions of authority are capable of growth. Michael responded graciously. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his tone warm but measured. "I appreciate your honesty, and I accept your apology. But let me be clear. I don't share my story to gain sympathy or special treatment. I do so because I believe understanding each other's struggles can bridge divides and inspire change. If my presence here today helps challenge stereotypes, then perhaps something good can come out of this situation." His words struck a chord with everyone present, including Judge Hart. She realized that this moment wasn't just about Michael. It was about the broader implications of how society treats its most vulnerable members. People like Michael, who dedicate their lives to helping others, often go unnoticed or misunderstood. And when they step forward, they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our biases. With newfound resolve, Judge Hart turned to address the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice firm but compassionate, "this case has reminded me of something important. Justice isn't just about enforcing laws. It's about fairness, empathy, and recognizing the humanity in every individual. Today, I've learned that lesson firsthand, and I won't soon forget it." As she prepared to deliver her verdict, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. What had started as a routine trespassing case had transformed into a profound exploration of identity, bias, and redemption. And while the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Michael Grayson had already made an indelible impact, not just on Judge Hart, but on everyone lucky enough to witness his courage and integrity. The courtroom seemed to freeze as Judge Hart examined the document in her hands. Her fingers traced over the embossed seal and the printed details, her sharp eyes scanning every word. The license was worn, its edges frayed from years of being carried around in a battered wallet, but there was no mistaking its authenticity. It bore Michael Grayson's name, his photograph, though younger and cleaner shaven, and the official stamp of the State Bar Association. For a moment, she simply stared at it, her mind racing to process what this meant. Her first instinct was disbelief. How could someone with such credentials end up standing before her, accused of trespassing, and looking like he hadn't had a decent meal or shower in weeks? But as she flipped the license over and checked the expiration date, her skepticism began to waver. It was valid. Not only that, but the name on the license matched records she vaguely remembered hearing about, a former high-profile clerk for a respected federal judge. Judge Hart's face flushed with embarrassment, though she tried to conceal it behind a stoic expression. She glanced up at Michael, who stood quietly, his calm demeanor unchanged. There was no smugness in his stance, no sense of triumph at proving her wrong. Instead, he looked almost sad, as if he had expected this reaction all along and knew how hard it would be for others to reconcile his appearance with his true identity. The prosecutor, sensing the shift in the room, leaned forward uneasily. "Your Honor," he interjected, his voice tinged with uncertainty, "even if this is real, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't excuse his actions. Trespassing is still trespassing." Michael nodded slowly, acknowledging the prosecutor's point. "You're absolutely right," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "I broke the law, and I accept responsibility for that. But I hope you'll consider why I did it. This wasn't an act of malice or disregard for the rules. It was a calculated decision made in pursuit of justice for people who often don't have anyone else to fight for them." His words hung heavy in the air, forcing everyone in the courtroom to confront their own biases. The spectators, who had initially dismissed him as just another homeless man causing trouble, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact, ashamed of their earlier assumptions, while others whispered among themselves, marveling at the revelation unfolding before them. Judge Hart, however, remained silent, grappling with her emotions. She prided herself on fairness and impartiality, yet here she was, having judged Michael based solely on his appearance. Her earlier mockery replayed in her mind, each sarcastic remark now feeling like a weight pressing down on her chest. She realized with growing unease that she had underestimated him, not because of anything he said or did, but because of how he looked, and that realization shook her deeply. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "Mr. Grayson," she began, her voice softer than before, "if what you say is true, and this license certainly suggests it is, then I owe you an apology." Her admission rippled through the room, leaving stunned silence in its wake. Never in recent memory had Judge Hart apologized to anyone in her courtroom. To do so now was unprecedented, and it underscored just how profoundly Michael had challenged her perspective. Michael inclined his head slightly, accepting her apology with grace. "Thank you, Your Honor," he replied. "But I didn't reveal my background to seek validation or special treatment. I did it because I believe understanding someone's full story can change the way we see the world and the decisions we make." His words struck a chord with everyone present, including Judge Hart. She set the license down on her bench, her thoughts swirling. This case was no longer about trespassing. It had become something much bigger, a lesson in humility, empathy, and the dangers of jumping to conclusions. And as she prepared to deliver her verdict, one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. For her, for Michael, or for anyone else in that courtroom. The courtroom was buzzing with quiet murmurs as Michael continued to speak. His calm and confident tone had shifted the atmosphere, turning curiosity into anticipation. Judge Hart, who moments ago seemed ready to dismiss him outright, now leaned slightly forward in her chair, her brow furrowed. For the first time, she wasn't entirely sure what to make of this man standing before her. Was he telling the truth? Or was he simply a skilled manipulator weaving an elaborate tale? Michael went on, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Your Honor," he said, I understand that my circumstances might lead people to underestimate me. But I assure you, I am not here today because I take the law lightly or because I disrespect the boundaries of private property." He paused briefly, letting his words resonate. Then, with a deep breath, he added, "In fact, I have spent most of my life studying and practicing the law." The prosecutor rolled his eyes audibly, earning a few stifled chuckles from the gallery. To many in the room, Michael's claims sounded absurd. A homeless man claiming to be a legal expert. It was almost laughable. Even Judge Hart raised an eyebrow, though she remained silent, waiting for him to elaborate. "I graduated from Columbia Law School," Michael continued, unfazed by the skepticism around him. "Afterward, I clerked for a federal judge, a position that taught me invaluable lessons about fairness, justice, and the importance of giving everyone a fair hearing." As he spoke, his demeanor shifted slightly. There was pride in his voice, but it wasn't boastful. Instead, it carried a quiet dignity, as if he were stating facts rather than trying to impress anyone. He then recounted specific details about his career, landmark cases he had worked on, pro bono projects aimed at helping low-income families fight eviction, and initiatives to reform housing laws. Each example painted a picture of someone deeply committed to using the law as a tool for good. Yet, despite his eloquence, some in the courtroom still struggled to reconcile his polished words with his disheveled appearance. How could a man who once held such prestige end up homeless and standing trial for trespassing? Judge Hart's expression softened ever so slightly, though she tried to hide it. She prided herself on being impartial, but something about Michael's story tugged at her instincts. Could this man really be who he claimed to be? She glanced down at the file in front of her, searching for clues that might confirm or refute his assertions. But the documents provided no answers. They only listed his name, charges, and basic identifying information. Nothing hinted at the extraordinary claims he was making. To test him further, Judge Hart decided to probe deeper. "If what you're saying is true," she began, her tone sharp but measured, "then explain this. Why are you living on the streets? And why didn't you seek help through proper channels instead of breaking the law?" Michael hesitated for the briefest moment, his gaze dropping to the floor. When he looked up again, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "When I chose to dedicate my life to helping those without a voice," he said softly, "I knew it wouldn't be easy. Over time, I realized that understanding their struggles required more than just reading case files or attending hearings. I needed to live among them, to experience firsthand what it means to be ignored, dismissed, and forgotten by society." His admission stunned the room into silence. The judge blinked, caught off guard by the raw honesty in his words. Here was a man who had willingly given up comfort and security, not out of desperation, but out of a desire to connect with the very people he sought to represent. It was a level of sacrifice few could comprehend, let alone emulate. Still, Judge Hart wasn't ready to fully believe him. "That's quite a story," she said, her tone guarded. "But stories alone won't prove your identity. Do you have any evidence to back up these claims?" Michael smiled faintly, as if he'd been expecting this question all along. Without hesitation, he reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a small battered leather wallet. Opening it carefully, he revealed a faded but unmistakable document. An attorney's license, complete with his name and photograph. The courtroom collectively held its breath as he handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. For the first time since the trial began, Judge Hart found herself speechless. As the courtroom fell silent, all eyes were on Michael Grayson. Judge Hart's mocking tone still hung in the air, sharp and biting, but Michael didn't flinch. Instead, he stood tall, his posture calm and composed despite the weight of the judge's words. His faint smile remained, almost as if he knew something no one else did. The prosecutor, sensing an opportunity to seal the case quickly, leaned forward and added more details about the alleged trespassing incident. He described how Michael had entered the business late at night, ignored warnings from the staff, and refused to leave even when threatened with police involvement. Judge Hart listened half-heartedly, her mind already made up. To her, this was a straightforward case, a homeless man causing trouble, wasting resources, and disrupting order. She glanced at Michael again, her expression hardening. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. It wasn't really a question, it was more of a challenge, a dare for him to try and justify his actions. She expected excuses, perhaps even tears or anger. What she didn't expect was what came next. Michael cleared his throat softly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Then, in a voice steady and measured, he began to speak. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge directly, "I understand why my appearance might lead some to form certain assumptions about me." He paused briefly, letting his words sink in. The courtroom was so quiet now that you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. "But I assure you, there is more to this situation than meets the eye." His statement caught Judge Hart off guard. For a moment, she sat frozen, unsure how to respond. Was he admitting guilt, defending himself, or simply trying to buy time? Curiosity got the better of her, and against her better judgment, she motioned for him to continue. "Go on," she said curtly, though her tone suggested she wasn't convinced he had anything worthwhile to say. Michael nodded slightly, maintaining his composure. "The reason I was on the premises that night was not to cause trouble or seek shelter," he explained. "I was conducting legal research for a case involving wrongful eviction, a matter I've been working on pro bono." Pro bono. The phrase echoed in the courtroom, surprising everyone who heard it. Wrongful eviction cases weren't simple. They required extensive knowledge of property law and tenant rights. How could someone like Michael, a man who looked like he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, possibly be involved in such complex work? The prosecutor frowned, clearly skeptical. "Legal research," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "In the middle of the night, at a private business. That seems convenient." "It may seem unusual," Michael admitted, his voice unwavering. "But necessity often dictates unconventional methods. I needed access to documents and resources that aren't readily available to someone in my position." He gestured vaguely toward his tattered clothes and worn shoes. "Unfortunately, libraries close early, and public records offices are only open during business hours. So I made use of what opportunities presented themselves." Judge Hart raised an eyebrow, her irritation mixing with a flicker of doubt. Something about the way Michael spoke, the clarity of his words, the precision of his arguments, didn't align with the image of a typical defendant. Still, she couldn't bring herself to fully trust him. "Even if your story is true," she countered, her voice firm, "that doesn't excuse breaking the law. You can't just waltz into private property whenever it suits you." Michael inclined his head respectfully, acknowledging her point. "You're absolutely right, Your Honor," he replied, "and I take full responsibility for my actions. However, I believe the context matters here. This wasn't a random act of defiance or recklessness. It was a calculated decision made in pursuit of justice for others less fortunate than myself." The courtroom buzzed softly as spectators exchanged glances, unsure what to make of Michael's defense. Some were intrigued by his eloquence and conviction, while others dismissed him as a smooth talker trying to weasel his way out of trouble. Even Judge Hart found herself momentarily conflicted. There was something compelling about the way he carried himself, something that hinted at a depth beyond his outward appearance. For the first time since the trial began, she hesitated. Could there be more to this man than she had initially assumed? Or was she falling for a clever ruse? Either way, one thing was certain. Michael Grayson was unlike any defendant she had ever encountered, and the outcome of this case was far from decided. In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and life moved at a relentless pace, there stood an old courthouse. Its marble steps were worn from decades of footsteps, and its halls echoed with stories of justice sought and sometimes denied. Inside, Judge Eleanor Hart sat on her bench, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and quick decisions, she had earned a reputation as someone who didn't tolerate delays or excuses. Today, like any other day, her courtroom was filled with people waiting for their turn to present their cases. The air was thick with tension as the court clerk called out names one by one. Among the defendants was a man named Michael Grayson. His name might have been ordinary, but his appearance made him stand out immediately. He wore clothes that were torn and dirty, his shoes barely holding together. A faint smell of sweat lingered around him, making others instinctively shift away. In his hands, he clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." It was clear to everyone in the room that Michael was homeless, or at least that's what they assumed. Michael shuffled forward when his name was called, his movements slow and deliberate. The prosecutor began laying out the charges against him. Trespassing on private property. According to the complaint, Michael had entered a local business and refused to leave even after being warned multiple times. The store owner claimed he felt threatened by Michael's presence. As the prosecutor spoke, Judge Hart leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. She glanced at Michael, taking in his disheveled appearance, and something about him seemed to irritate her. "Another one," she muttered under her breath, though it wasn't quiet enough. A few people sitting nearby exchanged glances, sensing the judge's impatience. To her, Michael looked like just another case of someone using poverty as an excuse for bad behavior. Over the years, she had seen countless individuals like him, people who came to court unprepared, expecting leniency simply because of their circumstances. But Judge Hart prided herself on fairness. She believed rules applied equally to everyone, regardless of their background. And today, she was determined to make an example of Michael. As the prosecutor wrapped up his opening statement, Judge Hart interrupted before Michael could say anything. "Let me guess," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're going to tell us you didn't mean any harm, that you were just trying to stay warm or find shelter." Her tone was mocking, almost cruel, and it sent a shiver through the courtroom. Some spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, curious to see how Michael would react. But instead of lashing out or showing anger, Michael remained calm. His lips curled into a faint smile, one that puzzled everyone in the room. There was something about his demeanor, a quiet confidence, that didn't quite match his ragged appearance. For a moment, Judge Hart hesitated. Was she missing something? No, she quickly shook off the thought. This man was clearly just another troublemaker wasting the court's time. Little did she know, her assumptions were about to be shattered in ways she couldn't imagine. What none of them realized, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the crowd watching intently, was that beneath the surface, Michael carried secrets far more profound than anyone could guess. Secrets that would soon turn this ordinary day in court into a story talked about for years to come.